welcome back to the Crow Club. It is mid-November, but that has never stopped me from living in the past and talking about things that happened and things that I did a month ago. We are here once again to talk about, celebrate, bring awareness to Palestine. The reason that I chose this for October's monthly month is because of October 7th. October 7th, I feel like, is the day that we all have started to understand what's going on or begin to learn about it. October 7th, 2023 is when Hamas, which is the political group that is in charge of Palestine, moved on Israel, killing about 1,200 people and taking over 200 people hostage. In reaction to that, Israel bombed Gaza relentlessly for the next 2 years. If you're thinking to yourself, well, yeah, obviously, that's what's going to happen if you attack someone, they're going to punch back. But I challenge you to think a little critically and to wonder why Hamas would attack Israel. This is not the first time that Israel has been the bully against Palestine. Their history is long. It has been 2,000 years in the making, and most recently the war on Palestine has been in motion for at least the last 100 years. So this was not an unprompted attack on Israel. Palestine has had a complex history, and it has been routinely and systemically oppressed, not only by Israel, but by all nations in power. America, Russia, the UK have all taken their punch on Palestine. All this to say, Palestine doesn't deserve what's happening to it. That also doesn't mean that the people in Israel deserved to die. That also doesn't mean any Palestinians living in Gaza deserve to die. And if you're going to take the side of, well, they shouldn't have elected Hamas, they knew this was going to happen. Hamas was elected in the early 2000s. There hasn't been an election. They have not been allowed to have autonomy as a country. And it's never, ever a civilian's fault for their actions of their government when the government has corrupted itself. You and I are not going to be responsible for the actions of our government if they're not people we elected. I did not vote for Donald Trump, so everything he does is not my fault, but I have to live with the consequences of it. So let's extend that same empathy to the people of Palestine. The death toll in Palestine since October 7th has hit the tens of thousands. If you're going to give the argument about the Israeli hostages, let's also look at what happened when they did a hostage exchange. According to the American Jewish Committee.org, on October 17th, 2025, Hamas released the 20 surviving hostages and 9 of the 28 deceased hostages. Israel released 2,058 Palestinian prisoners. Many of those prisoners were held without cause. Again, let's think a little critically here. If you're exchanging 20 people for 2,000 people, there's clearly a power imbalance that's happening here. I'm not saying bombing and killing people is right on either side. Holding people without cause is also not right on either side. So we're living in a murky in-between area where neither side is acting appropriately, but also October was Domestic Violence Survivors Month. We're not going to blame the victim. We're never, ever, ever going to blame the victim for punching back. If we can think about this huge thing that's happening on a smaller scale, if you're being abused relentlessly by someone for decades and you punch back and you're the one that gets arrested and thrown in jail and then beaten even more, I think we can all understand that that's not fair what's happening. So let's apply that kind of logic to the conflict that's happening. People who are being abused are reacting to the abuse. All of this is to say that this is something that's important to me and something worth talking about. What little platform I've created here, I'm going to use it. I really don't know where to begin and how to talk about this in a way that's always going to be right and exactly what needs to be said, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about it at all. I am insanely unqualified to talk about this at all, especially with any kind of authority, but that's not going to stop me from trying. My life as an American is a direct result of genocide against Indigenous peoples. It is impossible to separate what America did hundreds of years ago from what Israel has been doing for at least the last 100 years. The conflict between Israel and Palestine did not begin on October 7th, 2023, and it did not end on October 11th, 2025. Palestine has a very long history of systemic oppression. Their history did not begin with an act of violence. Palestine was a crossroads, a bridge between cultures for centuries. After World War I, Palestine fell under British control, and that began the 100 Years' War on Palestine. Palestine's cultural expression often serves as an act of resistance against occupation and oppression. Memory of place and distance from homeland are central themes in Palestinian art. A sense of belonging and belonging to somewhere is also a central theme. Keys and doors are symbolic and are a direct relation to the tragedy of Nakba. Palestinian refugees kept the keys to their homes as a symbol of their right to return, despite their homes being destroyed. Their key is evidence that they were there, that they belonged there, that that's their home. Palestine as a country and as a home and as a culture is rich and diverse, and it is mixed with different religions, different histories, and different foods. It is vast and expansive, and it cannot be summed up in a video, in 3 books. It's in the people, and the people are the ones that we should be listening to. It seems silly to encourage you to listen to Palestinian voices while watching a video by a white woman who is in no way, shape, or form Palestinian. So I'm going to talk about books by Palestinians with their voice being the front and center and not my own. I read 3 books to celebrate, to learn about, to indulge in Palestinian history and culture. I read You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat, A Woman Is No Man by A. Tufun, and The 100 Years' War on Palestine. I'm so sorry, I can't memorize this whole title. The 100 Years' War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonialism and Resistance, 1917 to 2017, by Rashid Khalidi. In You Exist Too Much, it was a story of a young woman who is Palestinian, she's bisexual, she's a DJ, she is always trying to find love, even when she's already in a relationship. She's always seeking for something more. She's always looking for something else. And after her breakup, she decides to admit herself to an addiction recovery center for having a love addiction. So we go through her journey and trying to understand how she ended up in this situation, who she's always seeking love from. Her relationship with her mother is extremely complex. Being queer in her culture is not accepted. She's seeking also still love from her family for being herself and not having to pretend to be someone that she's not. I ended up giving this book, I think, a 3 out of 5 stars. The writing was very pretty, but it was told more in a vignette style, and to me it felt like too less, not too much. I would have preferred something more detailed and more vibrant, and this felt, to me, a little muted. Worst critique I can give this book is that there wasn't enough of it. Next, I read A Woman Is No Man, and this was a beautiful story about generations of women trying to make their own way in their culture and in the world. It centers 3 generations of women: Dea, who is the daughter and granddaughter; Isra, who is the mother and the daughter-in-law; and Farida, who is the grandmother and the mother-in-law. This book was heavy. In the little cracks, you can see little bricks sticking through. Every chapter felt like a brick. Dea, being 18, living in 2008, and not wanting to get married, but wanting to go to college, but wanting to continue her education, wanting better for herself and for her sisters. Isra got married when she was 17 in 1990 and gave birth to 4 beautiful daughters, and being shunned and mocked for not being able to birth a son, being abused by her husband in her arranged marriage, for having to live with her husband and his family in America and not being home in Palestine where her family is, being taken away from everyone and everything, and having to learn how to love her daughters despite always being told that she should have had sons, being mocked and ridiculed for making daughters and claiming those aren't good enough and that her husband deserves a son. And Farida, who is older, and we see her perspective once or twice, and every time it's hard to see where she came from and understand that her history is not a pleasant one, and one that is devastating and a result of actions that she did not choose to take, of her also being married young and losing children that she loved, and moving to America with her husband, leaving her family behind and having to raise children there. in a culture that's so different than the one she grew up with, and still having to honor her culture and respect it in a way that goes against the grain of where she's living now. And so we see these three women living their journeys, being forced into places they didn't want to be, trying to break the system that they're in and to break the generational trauma that they've endured, and seeing them in ways that they maybe could succeed, maybe could fail, and maybe ways that they just become complacent and lose themselves in trying to be something their husbands, their family expects them to be. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It was heavy, but it was well written. The characters were well rounded, and having mostly Dea and Isra being the main characters, and then getting that sprinkling from Farida was really, really astounding and devastating at the same time. This book definitely made me think, and it left me with wonderment for how generations of systemic oppression in a country can alter the entire culture, on how living in a culture where men are meant to be the providers and the ones out there taking care of their family and systemically not being able to, and how that anger gets misplaced onto their families, and then their families pushing for oppression against their children because that's the only thing they can control. The only thing that men can control is their wives, and the only thing their wives can control are their children. Their children can't control anything, and that being a direct result of not having control in your own country because you're constantly under threat from the neighboring country who's trying to take over your land. This book was a heavy hitter, but it was very, very good, and I do recommend it if you are interested in understanding and you're coming into it with empathy, because there is lots of domestic violence and pain and suffering, and it could be very easy to say, that's why we need to attack them because they're doing bad things, instead of thinking critically and understanding people who have been systemically abused are not in a good spot mentally, and they cannot make good decisions because their brain is literally damaged from years of abuse, from generations of abuse. The final book and the nonfiction that I read to celebrate, understand, and talk about Palestine was The 100 Years' War on Palestine. I have heard this book talked about many, many times when people talk about books to read to help you understand what's happening in Palestine. And this was the book that I wanted to read to give myself a better understanding of what's happening. This book talking about a war that's been happening for the last 100 years that started in 1917, and that being a starting point and not 2023 is, I feel, vital information to have. I do not know even where to begin to talk about this book. This book is very dense in information, and I did listen to it on audio to help my processing. Sometimes if I'm reading something I don't understand, I do kind of start to glaze it over, and I didn't want to do that. I listened to this one on audio, and that helped me understand. Something that I do want to note is that this starts in 1917. Even the existence of this book is proof that the war on Gaza and the war between Palestine and Israel did not begin on October 7th, 2023. Even though that was the wake-up call for a lot of us, Palestine has been suffering at their hands for a century. It was devastating to read this and hear how systemically Palestine had been left out of their own conversation in regards to their political autonomy. When they're being discussed, they're not in the room. Their leaders are not in the room when talking about what happens to them. Palestinians are not represented when other countries are deciding their fate. Every leader that they tried to elect was passive, did not want war, just wanted to exist in their homeland and have autonomy, as we all do. And then in the early 2000s, Hamas was elected because Palestinians were tired of being bullied and not having anyone to punch back on their behalf. They have not had an election since then. Hamas has not stepped down from power since then. This is a book that I fear we will not see on the shelves if we let bullies continue to be in power. This is a book I feel everyone needs to have a physical copy of, lest they all get destroyed. And I don't want to fearmonger, and I don't want to say that they're burning books, but I also don't want to say that that's not a possibility. That history is often written by those in power. It's not often told by the victim. that is really all I have to say. These are the three books from people whose voices I wanted to listen to, and there's many more that I have saved on my Goodreads under Palestinian Heritage Month. And there's even more books that exist from Palestinian voices that deserve to be read as well. And the only thing that I have left is to encourage you to continue to listen to Palestinian voices, to educate yourself, and to center them in this conversation and include them in the conversation, to learn about their culture from them, to celebrate it and be aware of it, and to take it in from the people in Gaza, from the people that had to flee Gaza, from the people in the West Bank, from the people that still have the key. Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to listen and understand and to come in with empathy. If you do decide to read any of these, I hope that you do, and I hope that you get to listen to someone who doesn't look like you on the other side of the screen, on the other side of the page, on the other side of the audio, because that's really the only way that we're ever going to learn, and the only way that we're ever going to grow is to celebrate diversity. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for loving. Please continue to do all of that. Go read something. Stinky, I'm filming a video.